Hey everybody, this is Scott Wiener from Scott's Pizza Tours, and today I'm going to show you how to make pizza dough. I'm going to show you my basic, simple, go-to recipe. It doesn't take much time, doesn't take many ingredients, and it makes an awesome New York style pizza that works great on a pizza stone, a baking steel, cookie sheet, whatever you've got. Let's go through the equipment, then the ingredients, and then we'll start mixing. So for equipment, it's really simple. All you need is a large bowl. The larger the better, this way it's better for mixing. And, oh, that's it. That's basically it. I mean, the extra credit points if you have a whisk, that's gonna be nice to help you incorporate the salt. And if you have a bowl scraper, that's also nice too. You don't need them if you don't have them, so don't worry about it. Basically, all you need is a bowl. We're gonna be making this dough totally by hand. So for ingredients, I've got them laid out right here. And I'm gonna tell you the ingredients by weight and also by volume, okay? But it's always better to measure these things by weight than it is by volume because it's way more accurate, but whatever, I'll give them to you both anyway. So, right over here, you've got flour. This is 700 grams or 5 cups of bread flour. If you use all-purpose flour, it's gonna be a lot stickier and it's gonna be a denser pizza, but I'm using bread flour because I like it to be a chewier, bendable, airier pizza. So that's your 700 grams of bread flour, which is equivalent to about 5 cups. Next up is water. So this is cold water. The rule of thumb is the warmer your kitchen, the colder your water should be. So my kitchen right now is 78 degrees. So I'm using refrigerated water. This is 2 cups, which is about 460 grams of cold water. I know a lot of recipes say to use warm water. Don't do it. Use cold water. This way you'll get a better rise, even though it'll take a little longer. Next up is salt. This is 3 teaspoons of salt, which is 1 tablespoon really. And by weight, it's 18 grams. Fine salt. Fine sea salt is great to use for it. You don't want to use coarse salt or kosher salt because then it's going to dissolve less evenly. So use the fine salt. It's better for dissolving. Then finally over here, you've got yeast. That's 2 grams of yeast, which is about 1/2 teaspoon. And I'm using instant yeast for this. If you have active yeast, it'll work just the same. I like instant yeast a little bit better. I find that the dough lasts a little bit longer, but active yeast will work for this. Now you might notice that on my little list on your screen over here, it does not say oil. And that's because the oil is gonna be the last thing that we're gonna add to the mix. So to start the mix, I'm actually gonna slide the oil all the way to the side. We're not even gonna think about it. We're just gonna be thinking about the other 4 ingredients: flour, water, salt, yeast. Those are the basic 4 anyway. We're just adding oil because since this is a pizza that you're probably gonna be making at home, inside your home oven, I think it's good to use oil for color and it helps with the elasticity. So it's a good move to make. All right, let's start making dough. I'm gonna get the bowl out here and I'm gonna get all my ingredients ready to rock. Here we go. First thing into the bowl is water. Once again, that's 460 grams or 2 cups of cold water. Next up is your salt. Dump it all in. We're gonna dissolve it into the water using a fork, or hey, if you've got the real equipment here, a whisk, okay? I'm just gonna whisk it in. This is 18 grams of fine salt, which is equivalent to 3 teaspoons or 1 tablespoon of salt. And you just want to get it dissolved into the water there. And I'm going to move relatively quickly because sitting in the kitchen here at 78 degrees, it's just going to warm everything up. So I'm going to try to get this thing moving along. We've got salt dissolved into water. Next up, flour. Now I've sifted my flour. If you sift your flour, it's just gonna help the dough come together a little faster. If you don't sift your flour, don't worry. It's just gonna, you might see some clumps, but we'll work those out. And I'm actually doing all of the flour into the bowl. Some recipes say to just do half of it. I just find it's easier to do it all at once. So here's the process. Now this is all gonna happen before I even add my yeast. I wanna start allowing the flour to hydrate before I add the yeast. I'm gonna take one hand, that's gonna become my dough hand, and my other hand is gonna be my bowl hand, or my clean hand. I stick my dough hand right into the water, and I start to make little circles from the edge of the bowl to the center. As I go from the edge of the bowl to the center, and my dough hand is turning counterclockwise, see, it's going around in a circle like this. Well, now I'm going to use my bowl hand to turn the bowl clockwise. I'm kind of acting like a spiral mixer. That's like a fancy mixer that you'll see in pizzerias or bread bakeries. And the way it works is that the bowl turns, and then there's a hook, a spiral, that mixes the dough together. And this way, it creates less friction, so it doesn't raise the temperature as quickly as something like a stand mixer, like you might have in your kitchen. You might have a stand mixer. And you might be thinking, gee, I got a stand mixer. That's going to be easier than this. No, trust me, this is super easy. The only thing you're going to have to wash at the end of the day is this bowl and your hands. Maybe that whisk. But yeah, this is basically it. So our only mission right now is to combine these ingredients until there's no flour left on the side of the bowl. And I'll say this, even right now I can see that there's still a little on the bottom, but I'm left with this kind of shaggy flour and salty water mixture. I'm actually okay with this right now. I'm going to add in the yeast. This is going to be just adding in the yeast over the top. This is 2 grams of yeast. 2 grams of yeast equals about a half a teaspoon. And you're just going to keep up the same process. The reason we delayed that yeast a little bit is just to allow the flour a few seconds to hydrate before the yeast gets involved. That yeast is a living organism. It's a fungus. And it's going to feed on all the sugars in the flour, and that only becomes possible once the flour is wet. I know some people say that putting the yeast into salty water is going to damage the yeast, but you know what? This recipe, we're using dry yeast, instant yeast, or even active yeast. You're not going to run into problems. So here we go. I've got most of the dry flour mixed in. This is where my handy bowl scraper is going to come in. If you've got one of these, great. If not, you can use a butter knife, or you can even just use your other hand to pull off the dough. But I just use the bowl scraper to scrape the dough off the bottom, you know, any of the dry bits. And then you're going to be better able to absorb that into the mix. Now, I don't want to mix this so it's smooth. I don't want to start to knead this dough. This process right now is before the kneading process. Kneading process is going to come in about 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes if I have the time for it, because the next step here is to let this dough rest. We have not added the oil yet. The oil is going to come in after the rest. So all I really want to do is have this shaggy dough mix with all the bits of flour picked up. And once I see that there's no more dry flour on the bottom, I'm going to cover it up with a piece of plastic. I'm going to let it rest somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes. The longer you let it rest, the easier it's going to be to work after the fact. So, oh, this actually feels pretty good right now. Great. Most of the bits are, whew, one bit escaped. Most of the bits are in here. I can scrape this dough off my finger. And the next step will be to cover it with some plastic or a damp towel. Whatever you want to do that prevents the dough from drying out, that's what you do. I'm not so worried about that because my humidity right now is 50%, but you know what? I'll do it anyway. All right, that's about enough. Now let me get this piece of plastic wrap. And you just want to cover up the dough itself. You can cover up the whole bowl, or I actually really like to just put it right onto the dough. And then I use it to just bunch in the dough a little bit so it really gets nice and cozy over the next 15 to 30 minutes. And there you go. The next step here is to let this just sit here and rest. 15 to 30 minutes, then we'll come back, we'll add the oil, we'll knead it, and then we're going to divide it up into pieces and store that in the fridge overnight. It'll be ready to be used tomorrow, even up to 3 days. So let's let this hang out. I'll be back in 15 to 30 minutes. All right, it's been about 25, 30 minutes or so, and now I'm ready to finish the process, add in the oil, and then knead the dough. So let's check out what we got going on. First of all, this is what the dough is looking like. I mean, it doesn't look very different from where you're sitting right now, but when I take off this plastic, the dough isn't as dry anymore. The flour's hydrated. That's why we did this whole thing. And now all those little bits have gotten absorbed into this. It's stretchy. This is good. It's starting to build up gluten. Now, in order to add the oil, the way I like to do it is I start by trickling in about half of it and make sure I get any excess from the ledge of the container. And then I like to just spread it around with my hand and press it into the dough. So this way, while I mix, it takes less effort to mix. So to mix, I do the same thing I did before. I do a dough hand and I do a bowl hand. So with my bowl hand, I just hold the bowl steady. With my dough hand, I actually pull it out and fold it in the center and press down. Turn, and I pull the dough out, press it down into the center. Turn, pull the dough out, press into the center. And I continue doing this until I get all the way around the bowl. This way, I'm extending the glutens, I'm extending the strength of the dough, and I'm helping protect all that oil on the inside. So here's the rest of my oil. And you know, if you're using a stand mixer for this, you can just drizzle the oil as the stand mixer is working, but we're not using a stand mixer, partially because I don't have one, but also because I think it's better for you to learn doing this by hand. You don't really need to dirty up the stand mixer. Same thing I did before. Spread the oil around with my hand, poke it in, and the stretch and press method. Don't worry if it's not sticking. You know, you got oily dough, it's not going to stick to oily dough until you keep up the process, and then it'll suddenly start to stick. Now, I'm going around the bowl and I'm pulling out the edge, and you can see that it's resisting a lot more than it was a second ago. Since it's resisting more, I'm going to stretch it less. So you don't want to pull the dough so it rips. You want to pull it until it resists and then fold it in. Now, this is getting more incorporated, which means I'm ready to get out of this bowl. We're going to transfer the dough onto the surface of the table. Make sure that you've got a clean table. And there we go. Dough on the table. I like to have the seam side up. Here's the softer side, the smoother side. And with the seam side up, we can start the kneading process. Here's the kneading process. I fold the dough toward myself and I push. Notice that when I push, I'm not ripping into the dough. I don't want it to tear. Instead, I want to pull, fold, push, turn, fold, push, turn. And we keep this going until it gets way more consistent. Like right now, this is starting to rip a little bit. That's okay, that's because we got the oil starting to get into the mix. As that oil gets into the mix, you'll see the surface tear slightly, and that's gonna go away when this thing gets more consistent. And once this thing gets consistent and less rippy, then we'll let it sit for a couple minutes and then come back to this. It's starting to feel very nice, so it's almost done. And I actually think this is pretty good. Smooth, bouncy, awesome. So at this point, we can sit this dough off to the side and let it relax for a couple minutes while we oil up our containers. So we need to store our dough in some kind of a container. I like to use these clear round containers. You know, if you store your dough in a square container, the dough is going to turn into a square. If you store it in a round container, it's going to stay round. We got to put just the tiniest amount of oil in the base and then wipe a tiny amount onto the lid, and then we call it a day. So tiny, tiny amount of oil, that's it. In fact, I could probably get, oh yeah, that's too much. But I'm going to use this oil in multiple containers. So here it is all over the inside. Just enough to form a layer so that the dough can fall out when we're ready to use it. And this is just, you can use olive oil, you can use vegetable oil, I mean, it really doesn't matter because the oil is not, hopefully not going to become really a part of the dough. We're just using the oil to coat the inside. So you see I keep going back to the first container just so I can get extra oil. There we go. And you know, you never know if this dough is going to puff up. You're going to want to have a little bit of oil on the lids. So I'm just putting a little tiny bit, just a glaze. Scraping off little bits of oil. There I go. I probably use that maybe a half teaspoon for all 4 of these containers. So that's super easy. Done with that. While I've done that, the dough has relaxed a little bit. And the more it relaxes, the easier it is to shape. I'm going to show you the shaping method for this dough. And the shaping method, the end result that we want is a smooth, seamless dough ball. First, we're going to want to divide up this dough ball into 4 equal pieces. If you have a scale, then you can weigh these and make sure they're perfect. Each one is going to be around 290 grams. Ooh, 287. Great. 290 grams. There's one, and I'll show you with 2. 260 over there, so I need a little bit more. Done. All right, I'm just going to show you 2 of them right now. I'll stick the rest of it off to the side. All right, here's how we do it. Take the smooth side of the dough and put it into your hands. Now, we take the dough in our hands like this and just fold the 2 sides up and pinch them together. Then you turn the dough, fold these 2 sides up, pinch those together. And you're going to repeat this maybe 4 or 5 times until you get a really smooth underside. So every time you fold this up, you might notice that the dough is getting smoother. This is like the final stage of kneading, and this is going to help the dough get nice and smooth and even. Once you've folded it up your final time, 4 or 5 times, maybe 6 times, pinch together the seam, then plop it right down on the table, seam side down, and just use your 2 hands to just gently turn the dough so it gets into a tight ball. Then you're going to take that tight dough ball, you're going to pop it right into your container, stick a lid on there, stick it in the fridge. So here's the second dough. I've got a smoother side and I've got a stickier side. Put the smoother side in your hands so the sticky side faces up. Then you're going to fold the 2 sides up, press them together. Woo. Turn. Fold the 2 sides up, press them, turn, fold, press, turn. Here's the 4th time. Now, 4th time feels good enough to me, so now I'm going to gather all of the seams, pinch them together. Seam side down, roll it ever so slightly, grab my container, there it is, in the container with the lid on it. I'm going to store these in the refrigerator with the lids on them so they don't dry out. I'm going to put them in the back corner where it's coldest, and I'm going to let them sit in there for at least 1 day. When you're ready to use them, take them out of the fridge, let them sit on the counter with the lid still on, and let them get to room temperature. It's going to take somewhere between 1 and 3 hours depending on the temperature of your room. You need to do that so that way you're not baking a cold pizza. All right? It's going to last you 3 days, sometimes 4, sometimes 5, maybe even 6 days if your dough is cold enough. That's how you make pizza dough. Thanks for watching.